Hello boys and girls, this is Miss Holloway. Today we're going to be adding and subtracting mixed numbers with uncommon denominators. The lesson can be found on the Valley West homepage under HISD at Home Lessons for Friday, April the 3rd. You may want to pause the video, pull that particular activity up, and grab a sheet of paper so that we can work together. The directions state that you are to read the following math story 3 times. First time, picture what the story is about. The second time, focus on the question and what you need to find out. And then the third time, determine what important information is needed in order to answer that question. So I've written the problem down over here and I'll read it one time. Ariel picked 5 7/75 pints of strawberries this past weekend. His sister Yaneth picked 7 4/8 pints of strawberries. How many pints of strawberries did Ariel and his sister pick this past weekend? Step 1. Step 2, identify the question and what it is we need to find out. So we know that when we have word problems, using strategies really helps. So we're going to underline that question. How many strawberries did Ariel and his sister pick this past weekend? Okay. And then step 3 says, what important information is needed to answer this question? Well, what's important in this question? What are we actually looking for? We're looking for how many pints Ariel and his sister picked this past weekend. So in order to find out how many pints they picked together, we are going to need to perform the operation of addition. Step 3, well, what do we need to add that we need to pull from the rest of the problem? Well, we need to know how many pints Ariel picked and how many pints his sister picked. And we're going to highlight those in the rest of the problem. So we know that we need to add these two numbers, a decimal number and a mixed number. There's a problem. We cannot add or subtract different types of numbers. So either I will need to change 5 7/75 to a mixed number or 7 4/8 to a decimal number. Because this lesson is focusing on adding and subtracting mixed numbers with uncommon denominators, I'm going to take Ariel's amount, 5 7/75, and I'm going to rewrite this as a mixed number. When you read a decimal number, it tells you how to set it up for your mixed number. 5 and, so I have 5 and 75 hundredths. This number, 75 hundredths, this fraction uses very large numbers, and when I look at this, I know that 75 and 100 have a common factor. The greatest common factor that they share is 25. So I can simplify this fraction by dividing by 25/25, which is equal to 1. And anytime you divide something by 1, you will get something equivalent. So if I divide this, I get 5 and 3/4. So now that I know Ariel's amount written as a mixed number, I can now add his amount, 5 3/4, to Yaneth's amount. They also give us instructions to use a strip diagram or bar model. So I'm going to put this right here. And we know that this top bar is going to represent our total because we're looking for a total amount. We know one part is Ariel's part, which was 5 3/4 pints for Ariel. And then Yaneth's was 7 4/8 pints. That's Yaneth. So I have two parts that when put together will give me this total. So now that I have mixed numbers, I can take 5 3/4 and add to that 7 4/8. At this point, yes, I have mixed numbers, but I can't add the fractions because they have uncommon denominators. So I must find a common denominator. My common denominator needs to be a common multiple, preferably the least common multiple. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to write my two denominators down. And I'm going to list multiples, and the first one I get to that they have in common will be the least common multiple, or the LCM. So I'm going to start with the smaller denominator, 4. And if I'm listing multiples, that's what I hear when I skip count. So if I'm skip counting by 4, the next multiple would be 8. And I could stop here because the other denominator is 8. So I can rewrite 3/4 in terms of eighths. How do I find an equivalent fraction in terms of eighths? Well, I ask myself, what do I need to multiply times 4 to get 8? Well, 4 times 2 is 8. So the fraction has to equal 1. So I'm going to have 2 halves times 3/4. 3 times 2 is 6/8. Now I have mixed numbers and my fractions have common denominators. I can add. 6 plus 4 is 10 because we only add numerators. Our denominator will remain 8. It stays the same. And 5 plus 7 is 12. At this point, though, boys and girls, we have an improper fraction. When you have an answer and it has a fraction or fractional part, you want to make sure that your numerator is always less than your denominator. It should not be equal to or greater than your denominator. So what you'll have to do in this case to simplify is take your 10, which is your numerator, and divide it by 8. How many groups of 8 can I get out of 10? Just one group. When I take that one group of 8 away, I'm left with 2. So back in 4th grade, we would have said 1, remainder 2. But now we realize that we can write this as a mixed number. What I really have is I have one whole group of 8 and 2 out of the 8 needed to make another whole. So instead of 10/8, I now have 12 and another 1 and 2/8. I add my whole numbers. That gives me 13. And then nothing plus 2/8 is going to be 2/8. At this point, I have a mixed number. I have a proper fraction, but this fraction can still be simplified. Since 2 and 8 are both even numbers, I know that I can divide 2 and 8 by a common factor, which is 2. So I'm going to divide by 2 halves. Again, this is 1. So I'm dividing by 1. And that's going to give me 13 and 1/4. I have a proper fraction. My numerator is less than my denominator. And it can no longer be simplified. Whenever your numerator is 1, you cannot simplify this fraction any further. So at this point, the question asks, how many pints of strawberries did he and his sister pick this past weekend? Our answer, 13 and 1/4 pints of strawberries. Boys and girls, I hope this lesson was helpful. Be safe and have a great weekend.